And I just want to continue learning. And so I started a podcast 2 years ago where I interview experts in lots of different areas of emerging areas of communication. So it could be anything from artificial intelligence through to data visualization, and all areas that I want to learn more about. And so there's lots of interviews in the podcast. So search on Spotify and iTunes to find that podcast and give me a follow and a listen. In fact, some of the insights that I've picked up from recent interviews are going to be shared today. So yeah, do follow me. As I mentioned right at the beginning, we did a couple of webinars around sort of a few months ago. So it was around sort of April, maybe, when things really changed. And a lot has changed this year. But when COVID hit, we were like, okay, things have changed. And everyone that we know through CoverageBook and everyone I was talking to was just trying to work out what they were doing. So strategies changed. We did some webinars on how to sell into news desks when the news first started to change. We looked at different ways of changing KPIs. And so now it felt like that over that time, I have continued to speak to experts in different areas, and AMEC, which is the Association of Measurement and Evaluation, have release new guidelines around measurement, not all to do with the things that have happened this year, but they're certainly relevant, and I'm going to come back to that. And it felt like I wanted to share some of the learnings that I've found through the people that I've been speaking to and through my learnings from AMEC, and just share some of those top tips. And actually, having put this webinar together, it felt like I've realised that we could probably do a webinar on each section. But if there's anything that I touch on, then that you want to learn more about, let me know, and then we can go into more detail another time. But yeah, things have changed. It's not the same anymore. So obviously, I've just mentioned COVID-19 happened, and when that has happened, the public has changed. It's not just, before I get into PR and reporting, I want to sort of take a step back. And the reason why we are here is because this has changed feeling across the world, not just in the UK, in the US, in every single country. This news and what we are dealing with right now is causing a lot of feeling of fear. There's just a change in the public feeling, and that is making a change to us. Alongside that, there is a lot going on in politics right now, especially in the US right now. If there's people here joining us from the US, I know that this is going to be a lot going on in your social media and your news channels right now. But we found that there's a lot of distrust actually through our leaders in politics. And sometimes when there is a general feeling of distrust and lack of leadership, that sometimes goes through to organizations as well. And it's, again, that sort of changing feeling, and which has seemed bigger this year than previous years. We've then had things like Black Lives Matter as well, where, again, it's just a huge change in feeling. And this has all happened in 2020. We've had distrust from our leadership, but we've also had anger, but also passion. And through all of these huge worldwide events, there has been a real range of feeling, but the biggest thing has been change, and it's quite hard to keep up with, and we're all going through it. So what does that mean for PR? Well, there is a huge change in the way that the public are feeling, and we need to try and relate to the public and communicate to the public. And so everything has changed because of this. So the public feeling has changed. But not just that, we're trying to work out how we're updating the way that we're working. I mean, I am back in an office right now, but this is the first time in months that I am in an office. I'm sure it's exactly the same as you guys, but don't worry, I'm not going to be talking about remote working. There is lots going on in the PR industry of where we're at, how we're adapting the way that we work. There's some great resources out there. This is not what this webinar is about. If you want any of those resources, let me know. There's lots of great stuff going around. There's a survey going around at the moment, which I recommend you get involved in for PR Proofed, which is Sarah Hall's survey there, which is just sort of keeping us up to. It's really important that we sort of get involved in that kind of thing to make sure that we're all helping each other in the way that we're working. But as I say, it's not today's webinar, but that is important that we're trying to keep up to date with that kind of thing. But what is important is the way that the public feeling has changed, because as I mentioned, that's how we are trying to relate to the public. That's what our jobs are, and also then how we then go on to report about that. Because the public feeling has changed, and because businesses have changed, our strategies have changed. And how we then adapt and then report on that strategy change is a challenge. It's a big challenge. So I'm going to touch on that today. Stakeholders have changed. Who is involved in public relations has changed. Again, I'd love to hear from some of you guys if you are feeling this, but certainly from the people that I've been speaking to, gone are the days when we had a simple campaign and we had some simple campaign KPIs. We created a coverage report with those campaign KPIs, and we hit send on an email with that to a list of handful of people, 5 people who have a PR background, who understand our KPIs and understand our metrics. It's changed. It's not like that anymore. And the reason for that is because a lot of the time, for many of us, our strategy has changed. And so I'm going to be talking about that. So the stakeholders have changed, the report readers have changed. We need to be considering that to be able to tell our story, to be able to talk about the activity that we're doing, to be able to talk about the change in strategy, the change in KPIs. And also, last but not least, the budget has changed. So from that, it means that utilization, there's a lot of focus on that. Budget has changed because there is limits on budget now, but also we are now having to demonstrate what our budget has been spent on, and also, if we can, find some kind of return on investment as well. I mean, I know that's a real vast area, and as I mentioned, once I put this webinar together, I was like, hang on a minute, we could totally do a webinar on each one of these, but I'm going to touch on each of those areas, sharing what I have learned in the last few months, and then we can go from there. So focusing on that, is what I've just run through, is really sort of a brief overview of, wow, 2020, wow, that's what's happened for public relations, but also just where I sit with PR reporting, how do those things all affect us? So the public feeling change is a really hard one, but the most important thing is to track it, to track the public and the audience that matters to you and your organization, and then to be considering, how does that relate to your organization? So I'm going to touch on that. Also, the point about the pivot in strategy. What does that mean for our metrics and for the way that we measure? Do we need to change anything at all? Yes. Do we need to make some additions? Yes. I'm going to give you some ideas of how you can do that. Also, the change in stakeholders. So the AMEC did an update for their Barcelona Principles, which is a set of guidelines on the way that we should measure communications. And there's been sort of an update in who we should be considering in our measurement, and how our communications impacts and who it impacts. And society is in there now. So I'm going to touch on that. But there's a huge change, and people are looking at the way that organizations are now communicating in parts of our organizations which didn't maybe care quite as much about PR as they do right now. So we need to consider that. Finally, as I mentioned, the budget change and how we can really prove our worth. I'm going to sort of share on that too. So starting off with the public feeling. This is huge because we are quite used to understanding our audience. Once you've done sort of a big insight phase, whether that's through social listening or other types of audience research, Once you are within a certain industry, you tend to know your audience and how they feel, and then you can update this. But generally in the past we had that information, and we could go carry on with our idea creations and our activation of our campaigns. Now everything is up in the air, and people are changing the way they're feeling from day to day. I am, you are. And so we need to be able to track that, to constantly feed into our strategies. Generally though, what we've found is that trust is down. Trust in everything. People are also quite fearful. There's a lot of confusion. So going back to the confusion around our sort of leadership in various countries, but also in just how things are being organized, there's a lot of confusion. Having said that, the top three are obviously quite negative. What we have seen is that there is an increase in empathy, and there's been a lot of sense of community and people pulling together as well. So that has been some good there, but this is sort of a general feeling. What we need to do is start to get into the audiences that we're communicating with and that's important for our organizations, understand how they're feeling on a much regular, more frequent basis than we were doing before. So social monitoring becomes really, really important. And I'm sure that this was part of your strategy and a part of the way that you were working and putting together your strategies beforehand. What I would say is that you now need to add search monitoring and search listening, which is a new area for a lot of people. So what this really means is that, as you can read here, you can hear what people are shouting about with your brand or about a topic on social media. But by looking at search, it tells you what they really think. Now, this is going to Google and people putting in questions into Google. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail on this. But it's really important. And the reason for this, there's a lot more information available on this, but what happens is, and I really want you to sort of think about the way that you work as well. So if you're on social media, especially, let's go to like the Black Lives Matter time, when that was like sort of a really huge time when everyone was talking about that a lot on social media. People then went to go and inform themselves. Where did they go? They went to Google to search for more. So they would see sort of awareness and people talking about their opinions on social media. And then you want to go and form your own opinion, and you go and search, whether that's putting your phone out of your pocket or you're going to Google on your desktop. That is where people inform themselves. And this data is available for us to go and track and have a look. In fact, when you go to Google, actually do it right now. Open up a Google page, and as you start to type in something, so whether it's a question or whether it's a topic, Google will try and guess what you're typing, so what you're going to ask. That little drop down of what Google is guessing is actually based on the most popular searches that are happening in Google right now. So even that little drop down box that you can see right now, if you are testing this right now, is based on the most popular searches and what people need to know right now. So it's a really good start. I mean, that is the absolute basis of how you start to build up this picture of what people are searching for. So some of you may be aware already of Google Trends. It's an amazing free tool from Google, and it just is just the homepage, and which will start to show you like what's being searched for right now. You can see the Republican campaign for the US. Obviously, very, very, very hot topic. Corona has its whole own section, obviously, but you can start to drill down into your areas, and it is an amazing free resource for Google Trends. Now, you can use this data as well. So not only is this sort of, you can put in your own terms or your own organizations and start to see how what people are searching for, you can use this data too. And there are some really interesting ways of how to do this. So what I would recommend doing is, if you go to, I will share the link in the chat actually, but if you go to searchlistening.com, there is some lots more information around how you can use search data, and I'm going to touch back on it as well. This is also a great tool which is actually our tool. So some of you might know this already. So I'm co-founder of CoverageBook, but we also have an insight tool called Answer the Public. Now, what Answer the Public does is pulls back all of the questions that people are putting into Google. So that drop-down box that I mentioned, which Google tries to guess what you might be searching for based on the most popular searches, Answer the Public is taking all of that data, and thank you, Hannah. The link's just gone into chat there. Now, what Answer the Public does is just sort of bring in all of those questions. So remembering there's 6 billion questions going into Google every single day. So there's a lot there for us to try, and as marketers, to try and sift through that and to try and bring that into our organization topics or our industries. So Answer the Public does that. So we have a free version which anyone can go and use. We also have a paid for version. So once you get used to it, the paid for version is for people doing lots of huge searches, but start with the free one. There is ways that you can put in a topic, and then you can see all of the different ways that people are searching. What you're seeing on the screen right now is actually how questions have changed over time. This is something that is in the paid for version, but what this does is gives you a really good understanding of how, based on what's going on in the world. So you can see here that there's some searches around Corona on the 29th of April, and then again on the 26th of May. And there are changes in some of the questions. So around at the beginning was trying to understand what some of the symptoms are for Corona. And then later on, it's more about, can I travel with Corona? So you can see there how feeling starts to change. You can also, on the website that Hannah just shared in the chat on search listening, there is a Corona section. I wanted to try and show you, but I'll try and show you at the end because I want to take away from the slides. But there is an interactive graph of all of the different, how the searches on coronavirus have changed over the last few months. Now, that is all search data. So if we're trying to get an understanding of how people are feeling right now, you can just see all of the amazing data that you get back from there. So yeah, check that out and you'll start to get an idea of how you can use some of these tools. So as I mentioned, tracking how people are feeling is so important right now. But I've just mentioned a couple of tools, but ultimately I totally recommend, if you're not doing this already, a mixture of social and search listening is the way to be going. Obviously, with social listening, there are many tools that I would recommend. If you want some recommendations, let me know, but I'm sure you are already doing that. The search listening area is more of an emerging area, and yeah, it's so important right now, mainly because once you're on social, people have their opinions formed and they are sharing those opinions. Really, you want to get to people when they are forming those opinions, and that happens at the search point. So really interesting way of being able to track people's opinions and their feeling right now. So good place to start. Okay, so the second area that I wanted to touch on in the things that I've seen have changed and how it affects our PR reporting is the strategy change. And I've got the question there, changing metrics. Reason why is because it's always the first, whenever I've done talks, and I see it with other people as well who do talks or webinars, and there's always the golden question of what metrics should I use? There is no silver bullet with metrics. There isn't, I'm afraid. Yes, we do have a set of metrics within CoverageBook, but they are for consistency and they are article level. There are a range of other metrics that you should use and that are totally associated to your organization and your industry, and only you and your team will know that. But there has been a number of changes in the last few months. which do mean that we need to add and track in a different way. So I'm going to just touch on that. So what you're seeing here is some results of a survey that AMEC recently did. And it's all about metrics, because everyone wants to know what the golden metric is that they should use. So just as a reminder, AMEC is the Association of Measurement and Evaluation for Communications. If you aren't aware of that association, then yeah, Google them now and sign up, become a member. You've just missed a really amazing set of webinars that was all to do with their conference. They did a virtual conference. But if you do become a member, I'm pretty sure that they'll be available for you. And we actually did a search listening talk. Sophie Cody did that, which you might be able to check out. But what I want to come back to is this slide here, because this is all about metrics that are important in 2020. So this was the results of a survey. Now, interestingly, this wasn't just off the back of, since the world went crazy with Corona. This is just generally in 2020 of how of what we should be tracking and what we should be measuring. Now, interestingly for me is how big reputation is right now, and it's something that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. And again, we could probably do a whole webinar just on this, but yeah, some of the others aren't. There's no big surprises, impressions, volume, website traffic, all really important. And of course, metrics that we should consistently track for us to be able to see dips and increases and what might have caused that for our activity. But the ones at the top, the reputation is more of the outcome of these other metrics. However, it's notoriously quite difficult to track and to measure this. And so I just want to sort of touch on it, because not only is it the number one relevant metric that's come out off the back of this survey, it's also so important off the back of what's happening in 2020. So how public feeling has changed, the distrust in our leadership in government, but also that goes into businesses and huge organizations as well. That feeling of anger and fear, it all comes, that reputation is so important for any organizations that we're representing now, because that means that we are being trusted and our customers or our members will continue to follow us. So it's something that we all need to be looking at and realize that it's not somebody else's job anymore. This isn't a brand guardian's job. This is for everybody to be tracking and to be bringing into absolutely every element of communications. So I just mentioned AMEC. That was the survey that they put together, but also they updated the guidelines of what we should be measuring recently. So for anyone that isn't aware, the Barcelona Principles, as I mentioned, are a set of guidelines that have been around for a number of years, and they are put together by experts in analysis and measurement, and they're not rules, they're guidelines. So they're there to help us, and there are lots of tools that are available on the AMEC website that sort of sit alongside the principles, all to help with each one. I'm not going to go into detail of every single one. Again, there's lots of resources available for this, but there's a couple of elements of the updates that I found interesting that I think really sort of sit within the areas that I'm covering of the change. So the main one being that that key messages and the KPIs are now sort of a prerequisite, which is right, means that we should be thinking about all of that right at the beginning. So really important to be thinking about these sort of additional metrics that we're going to be talking about, especially around reputation and trust, right at the beginning. They should be added to our KPIs. Also looking at how our communications are impacting not just our organization, which we've always been reporting on, so what kind of business impact might we be having. Now it's how are we making an impact outside that organization with stakeholders and society, was a really interesting addition, which is again really important for things that are going on this year. But also that our evaluation should be rooted in integrity and transparency. Absolutely love that with what's going on right now. That trust is just so important right now, and so we need to show how we are measuring trust and reputation, but also being transparent in it as well. So I'm going to be just sort of looking at some of those areas and how you can sort of bring those to life. So what I want to make clear though is that I'm talking about trust and reputation and integrity quite a lot in this webinar and with how things have changed. But what we shouldn't do is stop all of the measurement that we had before and change completely the metrics that we had, because we do need some consistency with being able to see how we have been performing, and then with some additional ones. With the importance of consistency is so we can look back to see the activity that we have been doing, and then we can add some annotation and some story to that. So what we don't want is to say, right, the world's changed now, so we need to draw a line here and then just measure all of these new areas that are important. No, we need to stay consistent with how we were measuring before. So don't change those. What we need to do is just add some new metrics. So things like, if you are a CoverageBook user, being consistent with those metrics such as domain authority of sites or social shares, looking over those kind of metrics over the course of a year, 2 years, etc., are really, really important to be able to continue to tell your story. Now, what I do encourage you to do is, if you are a CoverageBook user, it is really easy for you to do, is to download a CSV of your metrics, so you can start to use that into graphs, and then you can start to plot when Corona happened, when huge major events have happened, which has affected your strategy and affected the change in your PR. This is something that we have started to even do, not just with our coverage, but just generally with the metrics of our business. So our founder, Gary, he has actually been working on all of the way that we measure our work, and he has been building different pivot tables in Excel and sheets, and he is annotating it with different changes that have happened and then what we did. It's really, really important to just go beyond now our coverage and our articles and our impact, and start to look at what else has happened. But as I say, consistency is key. I'm actually trying to get Gary to do another webinar next month to actually show you some of the tricks that he has worked out in with pivot tables and things like that by using a download from CoverageBook. So yeah, watch your space for that one. I'm trying to encourage him to do that. But yeah, as I mentioned, so keep that consistency of your metrics, but also we need to add ones that are important with the changes that we're seeing. And as I mentioned, a lot of that is around trust and empathy, credibility from your organization and your communications. If you have a spokesperson that has been going out and speaking on behalf of a retailer that you work for, or transport or a travel company, there is so much there that is where trust, empathy, credibility is so important right now. And also, as I mentioned, with the being able to annotate the changes that have happened, looking at how you've avoided that crisis as well in your communications. So I mentioned that I've been talking to lots of different experts in these areas, and today I'm sort of bringing together some of those best tips. And Katie Payne is really inspirational in this area. So she's also known as the Queen of Measurement, or the Queen of Metrics, I think she is known on Twitter, and she runs a consultancy and training platform, which is Pain Publishing. So I've got a link at the end of the slides, but recommends you do check her out. In fact, she has written some really good blog posts in this time of change about what kind of metrics to use. But she has said this, so how important credibility is. You need to work out the metrics that are important for you, and there aren't any sort of exact, here's the magic metric. It is all about the kind of organization that you are working in. However, there are some tools to use here. So consistency is key, as I mentioned. CoverageBook, if you are a user, you'll get the article level metrics as part of those reports, and you can download a CSV, which will have the publication traffic, which will have the social shares, which will have the domain authority of the sites that you've got coverage on. That is a really good basis to then add additional metrics into. But as I say, consistency is key. And the reason for that is what we don't want is for a couple of months to be tracking estimated coverage views, for example, because that is one of the metrics in CoverageBook, and then to stop using it and then start looking at average traffic figures from another software tool. Because what you'll have then is at the end of the year, when you are reviewing how these changes in 2020 have impacted PR and your strategy, well, there won't be any consistency just because of a different data source. And actually, that's going to really mess up your story of like how you adapted and pivoted your strategy and what changed. So if you're looking at a graph line of, we got the coverage on these kind of publications, and here's how it dipped and peaked. Well, if you've got a different data source, that story won't work. You'll have dips and highs in the wrong places. So make sure that your data is consistent so you can add more data to tell your story. You can also start to, quite important to be looking at Google Analytics to look beyond article levels. I'm also going to be touching on a little bit more about budgets and how you can get to ROI later on in the slides. But yeah, really important, right? More important than ever to be going beyond just your coverage metrics right now. And then in addition, around sort of tracking things like trust and empathy and credibility around your brand, Answer the Public, which I've already briefly mentioned, which is our insight tool, which brings in all of the questions that are going into Google. If you start to put your brand name in there, for example, and then look at all of the questions that are being asked around your brand, if you use the paid version of the tool, you can then start to see how those questions have changed over time. If you are I've got an example actually coming up, but if you're working on behalf of a big brand that may be a travel company, this is absolutely essential for you right now to see how people are feeling. So for example, if you have an airline, some of the questions 2 months ago may have been, when will this airline start? When will flights start? Is it safe? To now, when will they start to New York? When will I be able to bring my family? Well, there's lots of different questions which will start to get a sense of the feeling, and that's from monitoring the questions that are going into Google. Also, we've got Google Forms here. There's also Typeform. This is surveys. So surveys are going to be really important to your toolkit right now, which I'm going to come back to shortly. And then also, of course, social monitoring as well, which I'm sure that you guys are doing already. But I've just put BuzzSumo there as an example of super important area, not just search listening, but social listening alongside that as well. So a quick sort of example of your toolkit and how it could update. So looking at how you can sort of start to track and measure trust. Surveys are really, really great for this. So it's important to get that qualitative and quantitative data into your measurement, and starting to track that now. And if you have access to customers or to the database of your audience, surveys are a really good way. They do take time, but they are an amazing way to track your small audience. So far I've been talking about search listening. Now, if you get data from Google, that is everybody. So yes, you do get a really good sense of how the country is feeling. You can break it down by country, or you can look at the whole world, but that is a very big pool of people, obviously. That's really great insights. But if you have access to a smaller pool of your audience, so as I say, if it's customers, or if it's a database of your audience, or if you have access to your social audiences, starting to get an idea of how they're feeling through asking questions really gives you that sort of deeper level of understanding of how you are being perceived, whether there is that trust within your organization, and surveys are a really important way to do that. Not thinking about surveys for your activity, but surveying how people are feeling. If you haven't done this already, I would say start doing this now and then doing it regularly throughout this year, because this year has changed everything and people are changing the way they're feeling. This will give you this kind of insight that will feed back into your strategy, and the answers to this will start to give you a good idea of how you can track it. So you, from some of the statements on the left, will give you a sense of how you can then track that on the components of trust on the right, and then you can start to score that, and that can go into your overall sheet. So you'll have your consistent sort of article level metrics, and then you can start to go into more in-depth metrics. So you can see here that and this again was taken from Katie's recommendation, and definitely read more from Katie, because she really does help people with how to score this kind of level of feeling, and that's exactly what we need to be doing in this time. So I mentioned some of the data that you can get from Answer the Public. So surveys, setting up your own survey, is that sort of deeper level insight that you can get from an audience you have access to. Now, going a step back and going on a much bigger scale for your country, I recommend you go to Answer the Public. So this is where you can get a good idea of feeling by putting in search terms or putting in brand names. You can put in topics, you can put in different industries, and it will pull back all of the different questions that are being asked. Oh, people are saying it's frozen. Is anybody else having problems with, can you all still hear me and see me? Maybe there's just, maybe you may be having some connection issues, Kerry. Let's see. If you can hear me and see me okay, can someone let me know? Fine for you, Claire. Okay, yeah. Okay, I will carry on. It might just be your connection. Thanks, guys. So yeah, as I was saying, within Answer the Public, it's a much bigger scale. So you can select by country, and then you can put in, I've got this example here of Virgin Atlantic. So this is questions that were being asked. This was around 4 weeks ago. So the questions now will be quite different. So people needed to know what flights were being cancelled. When will flights from a Virgin Atlantic go back to Gatwick? Very specific questions. Now, obviously, Virgin Atlantic will be changing all of the ways of their operations. Probably each day, let alone each week. I don't work at Virgin Atlantic, I'm not sure. But looking at the kinds of questions that people are asking will really give you a good idea of trust and of how people are feeling about using that particular brand, where people are at, and yeah, how safe they feel. You know, if there's more questions that are starting to yeah, there's more questions that are starting to come through around refunds or where is the complaints number. It gives you a good sense of what's going on for that particular brand. But this isn't just about Corona, though. Like, this could be about absolutely anything. You know, we had the Black Lives Matter example right at the beginning. There could be organisations where there's questions around that, for example, and how people are responding. You know, this could be absolutely any topic, but looking at how people are going to Google and putting in their true questions, you get an amazing insight around feeling. So definitely do try that. I looked at this, actually looks quite small, I'm not sure if you can see that, but we touched on this earlier. This is an example of how you can start to, in Answer the Public, have a time update, and I'm pretty sure you get an email alert as well now if you're on the paid version. So very similar to the way that you'd be used to doing social monitoring, you can now get this with search listening as well on answerthepublic.com. So you put in your brand name or your topic and you'll get an alert straight into your inbox to say, this has changed, here are the new questions. Super important right now. Really, here's an example actually for the different alert systems. So you can be alerted like as it happens or once a week. And so if you are, some of you may well be in charge of updating stakeholders or the C-suite around things that have changed in your industry or how you are responding. I mean, wow, if you are looking after the reputation of your or looking at crisis mode at the moment, this is an absolute essential tool. So yeah, definitely have a go at that. As I say, there is a free version of just looking at the searches, so do have a play. Okay, talking about updating stakeholders, I wanted to just talk about, we've only got 10 minutes. I'll quickly rush through this so I can answer some questions. But stakeholders, who you're updating, I wanted to talk about this because I know how easy it can be. Well, actually, not easy. This is my point. When you're creating a PR report, you've been so busy with working on the campaign, then you're putting all of the coverage together, then you're putting it into a report. And when you get to the point of sending, you just want to hit send and it's gone, right? So, but in the year that we are in, there's a lot more people in our organisations that have an active interest in PR than just our PR directors, our PR managers, our marketing director, etc. You may have those people on your list of who you have to update already. If you do, just be aware of that. Understand who they are and understand what their needs are and understand whether they really understand public relations. And what I mean by that is that, are they going to get the metrics that you've got? Do they know what an impression is? Some people don't. Impression can mean something very different to somebody who isn't in the public relations industry, right? So just have a step back and think about who are reading your reports. And as I mentioned, understand their needs. So when you're doing this, have a really good think about what you are sending. Now, obviously, we're not in a time where we are standing in front of people and presenting anymore. So, you know, if I was, I would be able to talk you through this graph that's on the screen. I'd be able to tell you that it starts at a certain time and it's about how many pieces of coverage we've got. And we had a peak of 25 pieces of coverage at this time. Oh, and in those pieces of coverage, we had one that was on Huffington Post that it was great because blah, 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 blah. I'm giving you that extra explanation of the graph. Now, what we can't do that right now unless you are setting up a Zoom call for every single report that you're sending, which is going to be tricky. Great if you can do it, but not everybody will be able to attend. But what I really want us to all think about now is the reader of our reports and of those emails and what you're sending to them, because everything needs annotation. So remember in this graph on the screen, now look at this graph. Now there's only a small change just for you to have a look at that. We've added some colour is the main change. and annotation. So what I would have talked through if I was with you or standing in front of you and connecting with you all is now on the screen. So with that small change, the readers of this graph and this report can really get a better understanding of what we're trying to achieve here. And it's I mean, this is important anyway, right? This is more important. This is not just because we're in Corona times, but it's something that is really coming to light more than ever, because people are more interested in what's going on in communications than ever before. People are wanting to know how an organisation is communicating on behalf of, how they're communicating with the public. What kind of change there was? Is there more? Is there less? Is it because there's a crisis going on? But also, a lot of these people are not involved in PR, so there's an extra level of explanation that's needed, and also you're not in front of them. Just to answer. There's a couple of questions coming through, but I will answer those at the end. So yeah, annotation and any explanation is really, really important. And what I did with that graph was just add some context, and it's just really, really important. Also to really understand who you are sending it to. And so not just are they in PR or are they not, but something that I learned recently was, so this is just my point of the context, which I'll come back to, but yeah, who you're sending them to, it's not just whether they have knowledge of public relations, but also are they visual? Are they really get to know them? Are they going to care more about a financial figure? Probably, as we know. Or are they going to care about whether there was a logo or the spokesperson was mentioned in the coverage? This is all stuff that really needs to be brought to life right now, because you're not in front of them, because you're not speaking to them directly. What you need to avoid doing more than ever is data puking, which is what this slide is all about. So what we don't want is just a dashboard to hit send on a dashboard. Now, don't get me wrong, dashboards are very useful, but they're useful for you and me to have a look at, for us then to pull the insights out and then tell our story. Just sending hit and send on something that looks like this to a group of people, well, it's a waste of time. They won't understand it without any context, or they just won't understand it full stop. Now, I know that there's might be some of you on this webinar where you're like, actually, my client or my boss really loves dashboards, and they just want access to a dashboard. Yes, there are some clients and there's some managers who do like that kind of thing. And you've got to know that, because you understand them, you know them. Just work with them individually on sending something like this out, because generally this is not telling a story, so you need to avoid it and you need to pull your own insights out. And most of the time, you need to keep it simple with a story. And as I mentioned, especially if they're not in PR. I did a talk at an AMIC conference last year that was all about this. That was about understanding when somebody isn't in PR, but they do receive a PR report because it's really important to their role. The kind of language that they understand and what they need to see. And that could be different for all of you in different industries, but you really need to understand, like, what does it mean? What does PR mean to their role? How is it going to affect their day job? And I actually use my brother as one of the examples, because he's in TV. He's a TV commissioner, commissions shows. PR coverage is really, really important. Now, what's not useful for him, though, is just having an email with some reach numbers on. That doesn't tell him anything. He needs to get into that detail of like how people are feeling about the shows and things like that, right? So you need to get into that deeper level. Now, as I mentioned in this webinar, I'm just touching on stuff, but this is another amazing expert which I've learned from, and I want you guys to learn from her too. And this is Cole Knappich, and she is the expert in storytelling with data. So things like understanding whether they're visual or not, understanding what colors to pull out, how you can catch people's attention when it's only on screen and you can't talk to them. I interviewed Cole and captured all of her wisdom into a podcast. So if you go to the CoverageBook blog, so at the top there's blog and then there's podcast, you'll be able to catch it there, or search on Spotify or iTunes and it's the PR Resolution podcast, or search for my name, Stella Bayles, and it's the latest episode, and all of that wisdom is there. So and she also has some great resources too, so definitely have a look at that. I've realised that we haven't got much time, so I just want to really quickly touch on budgets, and then I'll answer some questions. But where I wanted to say about budgets is that they, for a lot of us, they have been reduced or frozen, or they're tightened, or they haven't done any of those, but then we need to be able to prove what we're doing with the budgets and whether there has been a return. So I've got ROI there for return on investment. Again, we could probably go into so much detail just on this, but I just wanted to share a couple of tips on something that you should be doing if you're not already. And it really is just going beyond going beyond your article metrics and just trying to prove a little bit more. Again, this might not be the right, this might not be ideal for absolutely all industries, but for most, this would work quite well. So what I want you to do is really think about not just the publications that your articles are on or your coverage is on, and what's going on that site, but what was included in your articles. So for this example, there's a link included in the piece of coverage there, and that link is going through to the home or the property website, which was the client. Now, don't just say, yep, there is a link. It's like, ask yourself, so what, in all of your reports now. So in CoverageBook, we do count whether there was a link. That's great. That's a great start. But go beyond that and ask, so what? So that you got a link in your piece of coverage, then what happened? Well, in this one, there was in the pieces of coverage, there was 10 links in the coverage reports that was going through to homes.com. That's great. But if you had access to Google Analytics, you could then see what people did if they clicked on that link and went through to the website, what they did next. And then that is really going to show that next level of business impact, which when budgets are tight and some forms of marketing and PR is being questioned, this is the next level of reporting that we need to be doing rather than just looking at articles. So when you're in Google Analytics, you can start to look at referral traffic and look for whether there was traffic from the articles that the coverage that you gained links within, and whether people then clicked and went through. And you can see that on the homes.com analytics package, or your clients or your organization might have different analytics packages. Get to know it and understand how you can see that. Now, good tip for you is that can sometimes be quite time consuming to look through all of that. So we have a free tool which we recommend trying, and it's called answertheclient.com. It is absolutely free to use, and it's just for PR people. And it's what you can do. You put all of the links of your coverage in, which is very similar to the way that CoverageBook works. And we will scan and you connect your Google Analytics to the tool, and then we'll be able to see whether anyone clicked onto the link. Now, if your organization has set up goals in your Google Analytics accounts, what that means is like if it's a retailer site, for example, a goal might mean a sale. Then you'll be able to see whether the people that clicked in your coverage then went and bought something, for example. And you can see that through the report that we will send back, which is essentially just a table. And then you can use that in the way that you might need to use that in your full evaluation. But yeah, you can get a list of the coverage, whether people clicked, and then what they did next. So yeah, another just sort of a nice tip when budgets are tight. This sort of additional reporting really helps. So I have gone over a little bit. Sorry about that. I do like to talk on areas that I feel passionate about, but just as like a reminder, Yes, 2020 has been absolutely crazy and everything has changed, and it's meant that public relations has had to adapt, and the way that we report also has to adapt because of that. So the public feeling has changed. How does this relate to your organization? Track that. Track how you can get in touch with how your audience is feeling on a big scale, when people are going to search for topics and to inform themselves. So you can use Google Trends, you can use Google Suggest, and then Answer the Public is the one where you can get into the detail about how those questions have changed over time. But then also, if you have access to a smaller audience, you want to be surveying them to understand that public feeling in change. Communication strategy has changed, but how do you change that in your metrics? Remember, consistency is key, but also add how you can track trust, and reputation is so important right now. Stakeholders and report readers have also changed. So think about how you are storytelling your results, your success, or the public feeling. How you're telling that story is super important, because you're not in front of people face to face right now. And also there might be new people who don't understand PR as well. Budgets have changed. They are tight. So really explain how you are utilizing your budget in the best way, and also, are you making any sales? Like, track that through analytics, or try it out or answer the client too. That brings me to an end, and sorry for slightly run over, 1 minute past, but yeah, if you can stay, I will answer any questions, so send them through right now. If you do need to leave, these are some of the tools and some of the resources that I mentioned. So Katie Payne is Payne Publishing. She has a great resource blog. You can pay for some of the training sessions as well. Storytelling with Data was Cole, and she's all about the visualization of data and pulling out different elements to really tell your story. You can listen to the podcast, which I mentioned. My interview with Cole is fantastic. I learned so much. I almost forgot that I was doing a podcast. I was just having an amazing chat with her. But yeah, that's all been edited and formed into a 45-minute podcast, which is on the CoverageBook blog. Try Answer the Public for free. Definitely do that. And if you are not a CoverageBook user, you can use the month's free trial. I think there was a question around the graphs that I was showing and whether that was in CoverageBook. It's not in CoverageBook. CoverageBook has, because people need all sorts of different graphs, we provide, there's a visual report, which is all of the screen grabs and embeds of your coverage. And then for all of the data, you can download a CSV, which you can then turn into those kind of graphs. And that's what our next webinar will all be about. But having said that, if some of those graphs are really important to you, let us know which ones, and I will badger Gary to try and get that added to the tool. Let us know. And of course, if you've got any questions beyond this webinar, just email me or tweet me. On Twitter, I'm at Stella Bayles, and my email is stella@coveragebook.com. So let me just have a look at some of the questions. Yeah, as I mentioned, if you need to go, thank you so much for joining. It's really nice to hear from you guys and actually look through some of the challenges that you're facing, and for us all to help each other out. But let me have a quick look at some questions. I think some of them have been answered, because some of them were around the links for the resources, which Hannah has added. Thank you, Hannah. Any tips for showing PR coverage results with links direct to clients, websites and retailers where you don't have access to that analytics? Yeah, great question. What I would start, sorry, let me just repeat that question again, just for people who are listening. Abigail asked if I had any tips for showing PR coverage results that have links that go to your client's website, but you don't have access to their analytics, so you can't sort of prove that, you know. So two things I would say. The first one is absolutely try and get access to the analytics. I know that's easier said than done, and you might think, well, that's, you would say that you're not working with my clients, but trust me, I worked with some challenging clients, and I worked with small organizations and I worked with big organizations, and it was really difficult to get that access to analytics. But whether it took me a month or 2 years, I got it in the end. And it's not just about like proving the links. Like eventually you want to go into a lot more deeper, if you can, deeper level of reporting that goes beyond just looking at whether people clicked on a link. And the only way to do that is through analytics. Yeah, I mean, I worked for big organizations that had multiple departments like around the world, where people, there would be like the gatekeepers to analytics, and like nobody's touching that, especially not PR. But you can do it if you can try and prove how you use that information. So I think Gary wrote a blog post. It might be an old one, but I'll find the link. Hannah, if you can find it, I don't know if you'll be able to find it. It's basically got a template of the kind of email that you can send, which is really helpful. But yeah, first of all, I'd say try and get analytics access. If you can't, then just counting how many links that you've got in your coverage is really important, because then you can sort of at least tell a bit of a story to say when people may have then clicked on that, or these links are really important to SEO as well. That's another whole other area, but they are there. So every time you gain a link in a piece of coverage, Google sees that as a recommendation to your client's website, and they'll therefore put your client's website higher up in search results, which is obviously great for exposure and getting more traffic from Google as well. So that's just counting how many you get is really important. You can do that manually, or we have a link counter in CoverageBook. So that'd be my top 2 tips, I would say. And then just also like any other engagement metrics that you can get hold of. Let me see if are there any upcoming updates to CoverageBook? Do you know what? There are. I'm probably not meant to tell you, but there's some really, really, really exciting updates coming to CoverageBook. If you are a CoverageBook user, you might even be able to guess what they might be. I can't say much more than that or when, but watch this space in the next couple of months. And yeah, the team aren't sat next to me, so I won't be told off about when they might be, but it'll be very soon. We've been playing around with the beta of some of those new features, and for any regular users of CoverageBook who are watching this, it's going to make your lives a lot easier. That's what I'll say, and also it will help with metrics as well. I think they are all of the questions. If I haven't answered any, as I mentioned, just tweet me or email me and I will definitely answer them. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you joining, and we will see you next time. Bye.